Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it is the end of 2020, and because it is the end of 2020, we, adults who talk about cool stuff, are here to talk to you about our favorite cool stuff that we played in 2020. The date here is January 2nd. I am your host, Paul, from Atlanta, and joining me is a full roundtable today. We will start with Mr. Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Hello, Flex. How are you?
Hello, I am ready to talk about the cool stuff from 2020.
Absolutely. There is some of that. Will from Apex, North Carolina, he knows all about that stuff, right, Will?
I hope so, because if not, what am I doing here?
Also joining us is Mr. Alyx from Cary, North Carolina. Hello, Alyx. How are you?
Hey, I'm ready for the end of the year.
All right. And we also have Mr. Ryan from New York City, New York. Hello, Ryan. How are you up there?
I'm doing okay.
Awesome.
Thanks for asking.
And last but not least, we have Mr. Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. Hello, Nate.
Hello.
Hello. So we have a very complicated rule set. We actually have an entire rule book. It's several dozen pages thick. Mr. Flex is going to run through our format for you really quick. So, Flex, you want to kind of take it over and let the people know what they're going to be listening to?
I would love to let the people know. So we are not doing any kind of... we are not doing anything complicated. We're not doing any kind of ranking. We're not doing an official list. We're not doing any of that stuff. We're just going to have a nice chat about 12 video games we enjoyed in 2020. We don't even know what those games are yet. So there are 6 of us here on the panel. Each of us is going to bring up 2 games we would like to talk about. And the ordering of that is going to be in a quote-unquote snake draft ordering. And we're going to figure out that ordering right now live on air. And we're going to go through the order. Everyone's going to pick one game they want to talk about. We'll chat about it a little bit, kind of talk about why we liked that game, what stuck out about it to us. Just talk about the cool stuff we played in 2020. And then everyone is going to talk about one game. We will reverse the order, go back up the list, and everyone will talk about a second game, and then we'll call that a podcast.
That sounds like a plan to me. So, Mr. Flex, why don't you start pulling some names for us so we can figure out who's going to be going?
I have a literal hat that I'm pulling names out of, which will play perfectly on an audio-only podcast. So the first name is Nate.
Mr. Nate, you're number 1. Just so you know, you're going to be on deck.
All right, and that means I go very last too, right?
Yep, you will go first.
That'll be
the first and the last pick.
Let's see what's left when I get back to me.
Yep, and second
Pressure is on.
is me, Flex.
Mr. Flex is number 2. I believe I'm sensing some issues here.
There's no cheating going on.
It's been rigged.
Nepotism.
Third is Mr. Alyx.
Mr. Alyx, number 3.
Number 4 is Mr. Ryan.
Oh, yeah.
Number 5 is Mr. Will.
Mr. Will, number 5.
I like the reverse backwards hand, like up to
Making it
the
work.
camera.
Also plays well on the podcast.
You're keeping us in suspense. Who's number 6?
Somehow Nate again. I don't know how that happened.
Number 6 is your very own host, which means I get to talk both last and then again in the middle.
Yes. You get to go twice in a row, so no one can throw you off. You just get to make informed decisions.
Seeing as how I've only played 3 video games in 2020, I might just drop off the podcast by the time Alyx. But anyway,
Choose carefully.
Choose carefully. So that's going to be our order. Mr. Nate, why don't you go ahead and kick us off? What is your 2020 video game that you want to bring forth for all of us to listen to and talk about?
Well, I have to probably start off with one of the more obvious ones. Game that I think surprised and delighted many of us this year. It may involve bugs and snacks. No, I'm just kidding. It's we're going to talk about Hades from Supergiant Games.
Nice.
which is, a studio that has been very successful in the indie game space for a handful of years now. This is their 4th game. We've done a spoiler cast on it. I think a handful of us have played it and really liked it. So without going through all the nitty-gritty of exactly what it is, I guess I'll just jump into the sort of overview of what makes me like it so much, which is basically that it is a modern interpretation of a new Greek myth. It's basically an addition to the Greek mythology, expanding that universe and telling a new story using a lot of the same characters that we all know about from Greek mythology, and it does it in an interactive format that is both mechanically incredibly fun through its very fast-paced action roguelike gameplay, and by weaving the sort of narrative themes throughout everything in the game, from its characters to its plot points to the lore text throughout the game and through how the mechanics actually interact as you're playing it. It's basically a Sisyphean tale of struggle and dealing with failure and interacting with your family and trying to mend fences between all of these knuckleheads of Greek mythology, both from Olympus and the underworld. And it just is incredibly well put together from top to bottom.
Yeah, I think that polish is something that really stands out about it. Like they just really nailed everything they're going for. Like the art's great, the music's great, the game feel is great, the writing's great, like the boss fights are great, the boons are great, the upgrades are great. Like it's one of those games that just kind of everything it does is just really cool.
Yeah.
And they've integrated all that stuff really well into the roguelike loop. Like even the narrative beats they have, like when you finish a run and you get back to the House of Hades and you get to chat with Achilles, or you'll chat with your dad Hades himself, who will mock you for dying to Theseus or whoever. It has a lot of flavor and personality to it that's really neat to see. And
so, did anyone play this game on the Switch? I'm just curious if it runs well on that hardware, or do we know?
I have played a couple runs on the Switch. Most of my play has been PC, but the Switch version seems fine.
Okay.
I get tripped up because the A and B buttons swap places, and that's weird in my brain.
Yeah. Okay, but it doesn't run noticeably worse than PC. So if someone's wanting to pick this up on their Switch and take it on the go, they're going to have a perfectly fine experience there.
Yeah, it's from what I could in the 3 runs I tried on Switch, it seems to run just fine.
Right.
I had a friend or have a friend rather. He's still around, and he's playing it on the Switch and having no problems. So it probably runs fine.
Yeah. But yeah, I think
and they just recently added cross saves between PC and Switch, so you can if you have both versions, you can jump back and forth, which is kind of cool.
Yes, I finally transferred my PC save that I've been playing since the early access period over to Switch, which is a fun thing to just see actually manifest.
Yeah. And I've been playing this game off and on for 2 years now, so because it's been through early access.
It kind of feels like the end of a weird long journey in a way. That's But yeah, I think kind of the last thing I'll say, and then Ryan and or Nate or whoever can give some more thoughts. But I think for me, as someone who hasn't often, I've liked roguelikes before, but this is the first one I would say I've truly fell in love with, and I think they do a lot of really smart things of just the way they give you manage your boon choices and like the room, like when you go from room to room, like you kind of have some say in the upgrades you get. Like I think they do a lot of smart stuff with that. I think they also do a lot of smart stuff with difficulty and what's called the Pact of Punishment of like kind of modular difficulty. You also have God and Hell modes, which make it easier, harder just from the jump. All that stuff's really neat, and the permanent upgrades as well are, I think they're balanced well to not be required or game breaking in any way, but also helpful for players. And it's a fun progression. And then I think combined with just all the narrative stuff, I think they've found a really positive take on a roguelike structure, which can sometimes feel like a really punitive structure, if that makes sense. So I think they've made a game that kind of leverages a lot of the positives of the genre in terms of like replayability and variety and all that, without kind of relying on the things that have put me off the genre at times. So it's just a really well crafted game.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that about what they do differently with their God mode. I want to give that a shout out, that it really makes it accessible to parents like me who don't have a lot of time on their hands, or just anybody who's just an adult and has a lot of adult things to do. And it's nice that with that included God mode, you can experience the game and not have to worry about spending a lot of time in it. You just kind of soak it in and progress a little bit faster than you normally would. And
that is a really good point, because it is the way they work the God mode in doesn't just make you destroy everything and just walk through the game. It gives you like a slight bonus every time you die, right? So you still have to go through the process of kind of struggling through the hardest parts and dying a fair number of times, but then it just kind of makes that ramp a little bit easier.
Exactly.
Which is really good.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything they want to add? Mr. Ryan, perhaps?
Yeah, I haven't put together my GO2I list for this year, but Hades, I think, is looking like a strong candidate for the top, probably one of the top slots, probably the top slot. And like you guys were alluding to, the structure of, so first off, if Bastion as a roguelike sounds like fun to you, then sign me up, right? But at the same time, I was playing a roguelike with my brother recently, and we finished it pretty quickly, and it was still a fun time. But I remember in that case, the difficulty curve was maybe a little too shallow, and the structure around the game, it was kind of more difficulty for difficulty's sake, or if you increase the difficulty, it kind of takes away some of your powers and the interesting things, like the upgrades and the interesting things that the game gives you that kind of make it fun as a roguelike for that particular game. And it's funny now that Hades has come out, of course, this game was 3 or 4 years old, so there's a big gap. But now that Hades has come out, in some ways it feels like the bar for roguelikes, in the way they manage their difficulty curve or their permanent upgrades has really kind of risen. And it's a genre I've historically enjoyed, and sometimes they do, some roguelikes do nail it and put a pretty fun difficulty curve on, but it's cool the way that Hades kind of it encourages the player it gives the player the ability to increase the difficulty while actively encouraging the player to do so as well.
Nice.
So, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I mean it is kind of something to say that hey, this is a game in a genre that has had plenty of other games, and for it to come into the space and innovate in a way that maybe other games would take lessons from moving forward, that generally speaks highly of the game, right? Nate, I'll give you the final word here. Is there anything else that you'd like to throw out before we move on to Mr. Flex for Hades?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I think it's a really special game narratively and in the way it evolves roguelikes and tells its story, and it's also hard to talk about without focusing on just how fun it is to play moment to moment as well. Like that's also something that shouldn't be lost.
Yeah.
So it's just awesome all around.
hard
But
thing
yeah,
to
we can go ahead and move on.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to convey in words, but yeah, the game just plays great.
Yeah, and one thing I probably should have said at the top as far as spoilers go, we're going to try and keep this on low spoilers if we can, or lightish spoilers. We'll try to give everyone a little bit of warning. If there is something in a game that is spoilery that makes it the reason why it's our game that we want to talk about, we'll be sure to give you some heads up for that. But we're going to try to not delve as deeply into some of these as we would for like a spoiler cast. So just to kind of give everyone the heads up there. Mr. Flex, I see that you're next on the order. What are you bringing to the table for us to talk about here today?
Yeah, well, Nate started with a showstopper. Hades is my game of the year. So instead, I will talk about another roguelite. Like, I'm going to jump from Hades to the Monster Train.
Wait. Who is this?
Yeah, it's been a weird year, y'all.
Yeah.
Who's speaking now? Surely it's not Flex.
Yep. Not only is it a roguelike, it's a deck building roguelike. So with power defense elements, taking three things that I traditionally don't love and just mashing it all together.
Yeah, this sounds awful to me. Please tell me why it's good.
And it kind of sounds awful when you just write that on paper, but somehow it works. It's wild. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I know Nate's tried a little bit of it. I don't know if anyone else has played it, but like the closest reference point is probably a Slay the Spire, but it's still fairly different. Like it is a roguelike. You are building a deck. But then it has a different kind of flow to both the battles and the upgrades. And I think that's kind of where the difference is made for me. And I like Slay the Spire too, but I definitely got into Monster Train way more than I would have expected. And so the format of it is, or of the battles, I guess, is you're summoning, maybe almost in a Magic the Gathering type of way, is like you're summoning monsters onto your train. They fight the other monsters, and then you can also cast spells. But there are 3 levels of the train that enemies move through. So you're kind of, in the way you're kind of placing your creatures in the train, knowing the route the other creatures have to go through. That's where like kind of the, quote unquote tower defense aspect comes in. Is it's like, all right, how can I set this up? How can I, organize this to be effective? And then between the runs, you get a pretty good selection of deck upgrades. Some of the standard stuff of like, just making cards more powerful, removing cards from your deck, those kind of things. But there are also some pretty powerful upgrades that are maybe less standard, like, this card just is in your hand every turn, or this creature returns after it dies. And you get to upgrade both creatures and spells. So they're not strict upgrades. You're picking, specific abilities in there. And I think all of this kind of combines. And also, I think another difference for me is that you only have 8 battles in an entire run. So I think what they've done, and I think this is kind of why it works for me, is they've really focused in on less battles, and all of your upgrades happen in between those battles. And they focused it down to fewer, bigger things, if that makes sense. So like the upgrades are pretty powerful. They're not incremental. It's like, sometimes you get an upgrade and it's like, this is just a huge difference maker. So I think like focusing down those decisions points really worked for me. I think the more long form of the battles where you're placing creatures and stuff makes it feel to me like one bad hand doesn't ruin you. Like you're kind of playing a more long game. So it's a more ironed out experience that way. And also, I really enjoyed the different clans. So there are 5 clans in the game, basically 5 deck types. And they all have very unique mechanics. So that's actually probably the thing I got into the game the most is just experimenting with all the different clans, because they all just play very differently, and I had a lot of fun just experimenting with those. So I think it's just a lot of the different mechanics, and I'm kind of giving the Cliff Notes version here, but a lot of the mechanics I think just worked for me and my brain and like how I think, and really produce this like kind of more long form strategic thinking or tactical thinking that I enjoyed. And then also just the variety in the clans and the that you can get between every run. And kind of similar to Hades, they don't have all the difficulty stuff that Hades does, but they do have, like, the base difficulty is not that hard, and they have what's called the Covenant system, which is not as flexible as Hades Pacts of Punishment, but it is an incremental thing that you can bump up. And, you know, you start at a pretty easy spot and you can bump it up as high as you want, and it can get pretty tough. So I think all of that stuff combined, it's one of those things that, like, in some ways hard to explain. Just the individual mechanics clicked with my brain, but also I think they do a lot of good bigger picture stuff that kept me hooked for longer, like experimenting with the clans and going up the Covenant ranks. And it was just one I enjoyed. I mean, it was a game that I enjoyed. Just, I don't know, it's a Sunday afternoon, I'm going to pick it up, do a run, and one of these games I just kind of kept coming back through on and off throughout the year.
Okay. And where were you playing this at, on PC? I
was playing it on PC, yeah, Steam. It is now on Game Pass. You can play it on Game Pass PC or Xbox console.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so there is now a console version on Xbox. And they've been doing more updates. So each of the 5 clans has a hero unit that is always in your starting hand. So, like, you always have access to this pretty powerful unit.
Yeah.
They added when the game launched, there was 1 hero per clan. At some point in the fall, they added a 2nd hero per clan. So they literally doubled the number of heroes. Wow. And as a free update. And they're currently working on a 6th clan that's going to be, I think, a free update as well. So they're definitely doing a really good job supporting the game and just balancing and adding content. And they've added new bosses as well to fight.
So they're doing a pretty long tail of the support on this one, and it's all free. None of it's like pay for DLC for right now, or do we know?
Yeah, so far everything's been free. I haven't paid enough attention to the upcoming stuff, but like the new heroes and the new bosses they added, it was a pretty big update in the fall, and it was free.
Okay.
And you mentioned, from what I gathered, you mentioned like a deck builder with maybe some tower defense elements. Did you ever play like Ironclad Tactics? Is there any similarity to?
Yeah,
it's been a long time since I've.
Okay. Unfortunately, I can't compare that directly.
Okay. Yeah, because I seem to remember in Ironclad Tactics you would like place like your mechs or tanks or whatever on different lanes, and that would determine how they fought your enemy's stuff.
Yeah, so maybe some similarity there. And Monster Train definitely, it plays a lot off of the positioning of your creatures. So like that stuff matters. And maybe that's kind of another point of the game, is I was kind of alluding to, like, the fewer bigger decision points, like the decisions you make like feel important. Like,
yeah,
whether it's in battle where you place creatures or cast spells, but also in between, like what you choose to do for your upgrades, like it feels important. And I don't know, I like that feeling.
A whole lot of strategy within strategy, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
So that's pretty much all I got on that one.
Okay. All right. So we will keep it moving. Mr. Alyx, what's something that you really enjoyed playing for 2020 that we haven't talked about yet?
All right. I'm going to start with my favorite game of the year, which is also my namesake, Half-Life Alyx.
All right.
So I just finished this game today, and
okay,
very timely.
It was quite an experience. Yeah, I was just trying to just make it through it in time for this podcast. And let me start off by giving some background about my relationship with Half-Life. I was never really into the games. This is my shameful secret that maybe I had kind of been burned out by first-person shooters by the time Half-Life came out, and I've had my fill of them. Doom, even played like the lesser knowns like Hexen. So by the time Half-Life came out, my brother was totally into it. He's younger than I am. And I dabbled a little bit with it, but never really got into it. But after playing Half-Life Alyx, I think I want to revisit the entire game series because the world building in this game is fantastic. So the Half-Life Alyx takes place in between the events of Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2. It's a VR game. A very, very high-profile VR game came out back in March, I believe, and it's a fairly steep hurdle to access this game. You need the equipment, you need a high-powered PC, you need ample room to be able to move around, which is kind of challenging when my kids are kind of using the living space as their toy room. And, there's all sorts of other things. Like, if you are playing connected to your PC, you've got this cord dangling from you. You can't really, move too far away from it. The way that I played it was with a Quest, and to get it to work with the Oculus Quest, you need Virtual Desktop, which is another additional application that you need to purchase, set it up on the Quest. It lets you stream from your PC wirelessly onto the headset, but that is the way to play it. The freedom without wires is truly it lets you sink in into the world. And speaking of the world, it's great. So it starts off, the first third is just an introduction. You start off in City 17, I believe it's called.
I think so.
You're just kind of like getting to learn how to interact with objects in the world, and the world is so detailed. You can pick up bottles, smash them. There's people that just spent 20, 30 minutes on the first section alone, just using a marker and writing on the windows. That's that was just what people were doing. So this game has so much things you can interact with. There's a piano at one point. You could just start messing around with the piano, playing the notes. You eventually get these, after the tutorial starts to end, you get these special gloves, these gravity gloves that let you kind of force pull objects toward you. And I think that that's a novel way of interacting with objects in VR, because you don't want to have everyone move a certain distance because they're going to run out of room to move around in. So you see something, you kind of just do a slight little flick of your hand towards yourself, and you pull the object.
I like the sound of a force pull.
Yeah, plus you get to feel like a Jedi, great. So that's always a plus.
Oh yes. If only they added a lightsaber. But this game is unlike any other VR games that I've tried this year, and I've tried quite a bit of them. Being full lockdown, what else are you gonna do? So I just happened to have picked up a Quest like right before lockdown happened. It was on my birthday, February, and then it came in handy. But I tried it out when it first came out. There were some issues technically because of lag or whatnot, and then I kind of just set it down. A couple months later, I tried it again. The latency is a lot better. Maybe after patches and all of that, it's gotten much better. So I was able to just kind of run through the entire game. And most VR experiences are kind of these short little mini demo like tech demo experiences. But this is probably still not a lot compared to some other games, but I clocked in about 16 to 17 hours. And let me tell you, it's like Inception, where you go into the VR world and time feels like it just expands like tenfold, because you're just stressing out over, guys kind of creeping up behind you. There is like, I'm assuming, having not played a lot of the other Half-Life games, there is a lot of these kind of horror elements in the game. A lot of corridors, a lot of dark corridors, and you get a little flashlight attached to your hand, which is kind of neat. So you kind of point wherever you want to see, but that also limits where you can see when you're trying to reload your gun. So that kind of adds a little bit more to that tension. But yeah, I feel like that first third was the introduction. Then the second third has a lot of these horror elements. You're diving into this quarantine zone, which has very, very, very well-known Half-Life enemies. The head crabs are just lunging at you, trying to get their snack. There's, I guess these kind of like zombie guys that have been possessed by the head crabs as well. These things called barnacles that are on the ceiling that have long tongues that kind of would grab you and pull you up if you walk right into them. So the environments become more and more alien-like as you kind of go further into the game. The walls are coming to life with these alien spores. You see it shooting out spores into the air, and it's like floating in front of you, like those like eye floaties. You're kind of seeing them all in front of you, and you're just at one point, you can't breathe it in. So it tells you to cover your face with your hand, and then Alyx does the same thing. She kind of covers her mouth, and so you don't breathe it in. And it does all sorts of cool tricks like that with the physicality of the game. It really makes good use of it. You're forging, you're looking for for ammo, for these weapon upgrades, and you're putting them into your backpack. So when you grab them, you kind of just drop it behind you, so it immediately gets added to your backpack. And you can.
Yeah, that seems like how that should work in video games, right? You just grab it and just put it in a backpack, and it goes in perfectly every time. No, that totally
yeah. It just really adds to that kind of immersion. And then that last third is the action part. It kind of pivots to, now you're an action hero. You got all your guns. You got you got to find some cover. It's like, now you're actually living out, a Gears of War chapter where you are taking cover. You're trying to peek out around the corner and firing your gun like blindly, or if you get an add-on, you get a laser sight, then you can shoot them down. So I could totally go on and on about this. It's such a fantastic game. It's just a shame that there's such a high bar, a hurdle in order to really get set up to play this game.
Yeah, it sounds so cool, and like want to play it so bad, but like realistically, getting all the stuff I would need to play it might be worth it if I knew it would work for me. But I'm like 75% sure that if I try VR, I'm gonna vomit. So. Yeah, making that an investment for me is not probably going to happen for a while.
It's pretty cool to have some some VR representation on Atacs, because it's been floating around for a while, but I know we've only kind of like tinkered with it a little bit, and it's also, I also think it's super cool to see like Valve coming out with a new game, like, and obviously people had good reason to be excited when Valve was like, yeah, we're going to make a case for a legit VR game, because like you alluded to, Valve makes very very detailed games, like very well crafted games, and they have a history of like the Half-Lives and Portal and Left 4 Dead, like doing these just kind of like these top tier games, and like they've kind of been quiet for a while. I think at least in a lot of their popular spaces, and I think people are understandably disappointed. I'm not the biggest Valve fan. I do enjoy their games, but it is still a bit disappointing to see like a company with that much development talent just kind of like chill out for a decade or whatever.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely been a while since they've had major releases like they used to. I mean, I'm a little like Alex. I got onto the Half-Life train a bit late. So for me, I didn't quite appreciate how revolutionary the games were because I didn't play them when they first came out. But the one thing that I did find really interesting about both Half-Life 1 and 2, that use of horror was really good. I mean, the "we don't go to Ravenholm" kind of thing in Half-Life 2, that was a really memorable chapter, and I'm glad to hear that as they've continued to iterate on the series, they're keeping some of those roots that I think made those early games interesting beyond just the technological marvels that they were. And it sounds like Alyx, they did a pretty good job technologically from the VR perspective, which is what Valve is kind of known for. But it sounds like they've kind of kept good on the actual gameplay pieces and the narrative and the storytelling, which is the other piece that they're kind of known for. So and I'm also in the same boat with Nate. I have motion sickness issues. I can't be in the back seat of a car, so me springing for a VR headset, I have worries about that. But I am glad to see that particular spot getting some well-deserved attention, and just I like that Valve's out there doing some new stuff.
Oh yeah,
I've been trying to kind of come up with some sort of way to kind of play this game. I've got one friend with a VR headset, and I was almost thinking of I'd just go to his house and maybe we'd like switch off on it to try and actually get it done. Obviously, the pandemic has thrown a kink into that plan. I had a chance to try the Super Hot on PlayStation VR as well as Beat Saber. And, I thought those were kind of fun, but those aren't, and Super Hot was kind of all right. But, I kind of feel like a game like Half-Life could take it to sort of a different level with the amount of budget and production they could put behind something like that. So
right.
Glad to hear it was everything you thought it could be.
Yeah, it starts off a little slow, and being someone who is not a fan of horror, being inside VR just like really adds more tension. You just have nowhere to escape from these monsters. But after the halfway point, it just totally ramps up. There's the story wise and just kind of like the action set pieces. It just completely solidified it as my game of the year.
Nice. All right. Well, Mr. Ryan, you have to follow up the technological marvel that is Half-Life Alyx. So tell us about Mario All-Stars.
Oh, man. Well, it's funny. I mean, this is a tough act to follow. I think I'm going to be dialing it down several notches because I actually wanted to talk about a game, something a bit different from some of the big games that we've discussed on Atacs. I actually wanted to talk about Trials of Mana, the 2020 remake. And I mean, if I step back and think about it objectively, like I probably did enjoy a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake as an action RPG a little more. I mean, it is a heavy hitter, and they did a lot of great things with that game, but we've also done a spoiler cast about that, so I wanted to talk about something that I liked that's a little different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess. So it was sort of a pleasant surprise. I think maybe late last year, Square announced that they were doing the Collection of Mana release, and they were releasing sort of the Super Famicom Trials of Mana translation, and then later on they were going to do this sort of 3D remake of this game that never really came out in the West. That was sort of a Japan exclusive. and it's sort of a pleasant surprise to see them kind of revisiting some of these old school franchises like the Mana series that's kind of been on hiatus for a while. And for me personally, like, I think the Mana games kind of scratch a little bit of an itch in some ways, in that they're these very bright and colorful games, at least starting around Secret of Mana, and they have these really like distinctive, like very pretty art styles, and they have this, these very like catchy, like kind of upbeat soundtracks. They do a lot of good things with their music. I mean, Square Enix kind of like, I think for both Secret and maybe for Trials as well, kind of brought some of their strong talent from that era, that SNES era, and kind of built these action RPGs. So I don't know, just sort of the way that the Mana games sort of have this sort of colorful aesthetic, and like this sort of like kind of happy music kind of clicks with me, and also the fact that they're action RPGs. So I think the 2020 remake of Trials of Mana does a pretty good job of capturing sort of that core of the sort of Secret / Trial, Seiken Densetsu 3, like Trials of Mana, like action RPG style gameplay, where you have again, they're not the most refined action RPGs, especially by today's standards, but they have like a magic system, and you have different weapons, and kind of like they feel a little bit like beat 'em ups, but with like RPG mechanics and like magic. And I guess one of the things that Trials in particular does interesting, the pacing isn't perfect. It's not a perfect game in that sense, but one thing it does that I actually really think is kind of cool, and it plays out pretty well, is if you're familiar with Secret of Mana, like the structure of that game is you have 3 characters, and you can actually play, I think, co-op in that particular game. But you have 3 characters. You have the boy, the girl, and the sprite, and they sort of I think they can equip all the weapons, but like the sprite gets offensive magic, and the girl gets more like support and healing magic. Well, what they've done in Trials of Mana is, even back in the SNES era, but they've also carried that into the remake, is at the beginning of the game, you choose 3 characters out of 6 different characters. And then, so for example, my first party was Kevin, who's sort of like he's like a grappler. He fights with his fists. He also turns into a werewolf when it's night. They have a day-night cycle, and he turns into a werewolf at night just because.
Yeah, because when I think of a werewolf, I think of Kevin. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And I had Angela, who's sort of like one of the dedicated offensive spellcasters, and then I chose Reese, who is like she's sort of like a Valkyrie, but her thing is she kind of can either support your party or debuff the enemies. So they kind of give you this sort of like mix and match choice where you can sort of build your own team. And then as you play through the game, like you get these, I think at 2 points in the game, you get a chance to like upgrade your class to like a light or a dark class. And so like with Kevin, I chose more dark classes. So he went from like a grappler to like a brawler or something. And with a character like Reese, I chose light classes, which gave her support magic. But if I had chosen dark classes for Reese, she would have gotten like debuff magic. So it sort of gives you this interesting, you have these roles similar to Secret of Mana, where it's like you have the offensive caster and the healing caster, but you can kind of like choose as you play through, like, okay, well, I want my fist fighter to be really offensive, like just all out aggro. And I want my support character to focus more on buffs than debuffs. So I don't know. It's kind of I really enjoyed it. I think I did. I think I got the platinum trophy for it. I did a couple of New Game Plus playthroughs just because, like I said, I was kind of like just kind of enjoying rolling through it. And I think the remake also did a great job in like kind of touching up the original soundtracks in a nice way. So that
I was curious if the remake, like, if it changed a lot of the original. I mean, I'm guessing visually and the soundtrack, it bumped things up. Do you know if it like changed much of the structure or things, or like rebalance anything, or is it pretty much the same game from what you know?
That's a good question. Like, I am not super familiar. I get the feeling that a lot of the structure is the same. I think some of the combat, and I'm not sure about some of the class skills and the way that stuff plays out, if they mapped it or if they rebalanced some things there. But it does feel, again, I'm not intimately familiar with the original, but it does feel pretty faithful. Like, it feels like a pretty faithful remake to that style of mana game. And I think the structure is very similar too. I think it follows almost the same story progression and everything.
Yeah, and I may be getting this one confused with one of the other ones in the series, but was there a city building aspect of this one at all, or was that one of the other ones?
That's Legend of Mana. That was
Okay.
the PlayStation game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you encounter that character Charlotte? Because that was what I heard a lot about this game on the Twitter sphere.
Oh man! So one thing that's unfortunate about this game is if you play it with the Japanese voice acting, because apparently I tried a little bit of the English voice acting and it was like, it was not great. It was very inconsistent. And yeah, Charlotte, even in the Japanese version, she got on my nerves so bad. I did a playthrough with her and she like talks like a baby, except it's in screechy Japanese. So I'm like, oh, stop talking, Charlotte, no.
I'm glad you enjoyed the game though, regardless of Charlotte.
Thanks. But yeah, that's all I've got, and I don't know if anybody else played it.
No, I've not played the Mana series. That's probably one of my blind spots for JRPGs. So, but I'm glad to hear that one migrated fairly well to 2020 because I know those were super popular back in the SNES era. So I'm glad they did a good job on that one. And if I do pick up the game, I'll be sure to not include Charlotte in my party. That's what I'm hearing. So
yeah, that's a winning strategy.
all right. Thank you, Mr. Ryan. Mr. Will, JRPG fanatic over there, has played so many of them.
Yeah, I thought Will was our JRPG expert. Ryan's stealing his thunder.
Still in his thunder. What you bringing, Will?
Well, people who pay attention to the nonsense I write in the Discord probably have a good idea of what I'm going to talk about. But I was going to start with Wide Open Big Jacket. It's a game that was developed by Turnfollow. It's also on iOS and Switch. I played it on Steam. And it's in some ways, I guess I don't know if you call it kind of a visual novel in some ways, but it's very mundane in a lot of ways. But I think that the sort of, I guess the lack of fantastical elements to the story are kind of made up by how strong the characters are and kind of the exuberance of the main character that you're following around, which is a girl named Mord. She's on a camping trip. That's where the game takes place, on a camping trip. And she's with her boyfriend, Ben, and her aunt and uncle. The uncle's named Brad, and the aunt is Chloanne. And she just goes through some sort of traditional crap you would do when you go camping. They're camping near the beach, so they walk down towards the beach. They cook some hot dogs. They have to try to find a place to use the bathroom. They're trying to kind of get beers and set the tent up. And it's just all this little sort of slice of life stuff. But I had this permanent smile plastered on my face the whole time I was playing this game. And I just found the humor to be really, really good, and your involvement in the humor to be very good. I think there's a part of it, a lot of times you'll kind of trigger when the next dialogue happens, and some of the times when you're actually playing one of the characters, you'll kind of, the animation is sort of this sort of goofy, stilted, cartoony stuff, and so you'll kind of play a role in the humor and the timing of the humor. But I guess I felt like, it's not necessarily that I think I feel any sort of shame about sort of the types of things I'm excited about. But at the same time, I think as you grow older and you see more things, it's very easy to kind of get this, there's nothing new under the sun kind of malaise, kind of fall into that sort of sphere. And so I think Mord, the 13-year-old girl, has got just this crazy excitement about everything, and everything is funny, and everything is humorous, and everything is new. And she's got all these big questions that she asks her uncle and aunt, and they have no idea how to answer them correctly. They have no idea, like, oh, you want us to talk to you about what? Like, maybe your parents can talk to you about this. And, and so to me, it's just sort of this really interesting kind of collision. And it almost seems that Brad and Chloe Ann are kind of using the camping trip as a way to kind of figure out whether or not they want to have children. And so, of course, that kind of adds a different element to it. But I just found it just unbearably charming. So, but that was the first thing, I guess. And luckily, it does seem like we had a couple. I was able to strong arm a couple of my fellow Ataxers into trying this game. So I'd love to hear what they have to say, if anything. But
I mean, I just really felt strong-armed to do it. Yeah, it's a super charming game. I need you to fully explain the meaning of the name Wide Ocean Big Jacket, because I have no idea what that means.
I don't either. I got nothing. It's interesting. I found out that this team, Turnfollow, had done a game that I played on Itch.io back in 2017 called Packing Up the Rest of Your Stuff on the Last Day at Your Old Apartment. And that game found its way to a couple of little niche top 10 lists, and so I wanted to try it out.
That name makes sense to me,
right? Because that's what you're doing in the game.
It's very descriptive, right?
Yeah, but I have no idea where Wide Ocean Big Jacket is coming from. But that other game that I mentioned that I won't actually say anything else about is also kind of a slice of life thing, sort of mundane thing that you're doing that kind of takes on a certain meaning because it's something that we've all kind of had to do at one point or another, is leave a place that we've become really accustomed to.
Yeah, I did play through this. It's very short, like an hour and a half or so. And I don't have much to add over what Will said, because I think Will pretty much covered it, but it is very charming, and the characters are incredibly likable. Just a lot, and really good writing too. I think they kind of captured the characters really well, and they express them very well. Is a definitely a worthwhile story to go through.
And you said it was a visual novel. Did I catch that right?
Yeah.
What are
for the most
genres?
part, I don't know. It's a weird thing. I mean, I've played visual novels with a lot less interactivity, but I've also probably played some with more.
Yeah, that's really what I was trying to focus in on, like the types of interactivity, and like what is the the actual player involvement with how that story rolls out.
Yeah, you got to go get a tent, and then you got to take it back somewhere else and put it up. You might have to go get a beer. You have to cook some hot dogs. I mean, I guess, but it could be that part of the reason I like this so much is because I played it during quarantine, and it was just, they were outdoors and they were together and it was happy,
Yeah, no, I mean, totally a time and place thing, right?
Yeah. So anyway, and I do a little Steam stalking, and I saw that our resident Half-Life Alyx expert played this today. I don't know if he would like to comment. I'm just calling him out completely. But I want everyone to play this, basically. So
I love this game, and the runtime of this game was perfect. I was just able to squeeze in one more game that we could discuss today, and I'm glad that you brought this game up. I agree. The characters are super charming. I just want to hang out with these kids and this couple as well. Like, I feel like they have so much personality, and why is my life boring? Like these people are so cool. Like at age 13 or whatever, these kids are great, and they're so expressive, and they kind of like are just fumbling through the world, and they have a lot of questions, and you kind of feel like you want to try to give them some answers, but You know, it's that's how it is, and I love this kind of slice of life style of game. Give me more short games like these that I could just kind of, you know, gobble up in one session, and then I'll gladly fork over,
Right.
$15, $20 or whatever, just to experience kind of like being in the shoes of someone else.
Yeah. So, but anyway, that's about all I had to say on that one, beloved host.
You made a very persuasive argument. It is now on my Steam library. If anyone's curious, it's $3.19. So I think we can all afford that. So I guess we're going to come to me here at the end of the order. So I'm going to go through a couple of games. I have more to say about one than the other, so I don't know that I'm going to use my entire time here. But the game that I wanted to talk about that I've been sinking in a decent amount of time is Genshin Impact, right? So that came out this year, and it is a free-to-play game developed from a Chinese developer named MiHoYo, and it's a really interesting game, and part of the reason why I want to talk about it is how much I've been enjoying it, but the other part of it is it's just not a type of game that I've run into before in terms of how it's marketed and how it actually plays out. So like I said, Genshin Impact is free to play. You go to the website, you give them your email address and log in, and then you just download it, and it is a full experience. You can play through all of the story content that game has. Single player, you don't have to play with other people, and the game sets you up with basically enough firepower to see all of the story driven content, right? So what is it? It's kind of like people like to use the Breath of the Wild sort of analogy, and I think that works to a limited degree. The movement feels like Breath of the Wild. There's the climbing feels very similar. The gliding feels very similar. There's a stamina meter, so those are similarities. And the game does a really good job of mimicking Breath of the Wild in a way that feels good. They remove some stuff that some folks found annoying in Breath of the Wild, like the slipping off of cliffs whenever it's raining. You don't have anything like that in Genshin Impact. So the movement feels very good. The combat is what I would say is a little light. It's got a system of basically elements that, it's like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing. You can make chain reactions. There's some that don't make a ton of sense in the real world. Like if someone's on fire and you hit them with lightning, they explode, which is really satisfying in the game. But I'm not sure how well that tracks with, stuff that happens out in nature. But it's a little simplistic, but it is satisfying, right? So, running up to a big group of enemies and using a character's AoE to add to give them all the fire effects, and then hitting them with a lightning AoE and making them all explode. Like that's just something that it just feels good whenever you do it. So the gameplay might be a little light in some places, but I would still say it's satisfying. It is a gacha game, and I know that that's one of those things that this is where the game makes its money, right? They're going to give you a certain number of free characters. They'll basically let you get to a certain power level without spending any money inside of the actual game system. But at some point, they're going to come out with new characters. They're going to come out with new swords, new costumes, new shinies. And they're going to want you to spend money on like a lottery-style system to try to get those characters. It's something that got popularized in a lot of mobile games. The thing that I like about Genshin, though, like I said, you can get through practically all the story content without engaging with the gacha mechanics at all. It's when you start to really put the hours into the game to where you start to understand how these mechanics work. You start to understand, all right, here's how I upgrade swords. I'm going to feed this sword to that sword, but then I need this special material to maybe rank up my sword to once you get to that level, you've probably already put 20-ish hours into the game. You're not going to feel bad about spending, $4.99 on some gems or something like that. They do give out some of the premium currency, so it's not like you have to pay for every single little gem or every single banana dollar that you end up using. It is a little stingier than some of the other gacha games, but I don't really have a problem with that. I feel like that they've been good enough with the game to let you really get a whole lot of playtime out of it for absolutely free. And there's a roadmap. They're adding stuff all the time. The story has gotten through 2 of the 7 planned regions. So there's still a lot left to go. And they've been making constant improvements to it. So, it's one of those things that I think is very interesting because you can really experience the meat of the game for free. And it's not like you're playing it's not like you're playing a subpar experience. It's not like you're a free player on a B or C grade MMO. Like it feels like a AAA game that is still being worked on. So I've really enjoyed what I've played of it. It does have co-op. So my wife and I have been playing it, off and on, and there's a lot of stuff at the end game to do. There's a lot of content. There's a lot of challenges. And, of course, those challenges feed into you really need this character, and that character's behind a paywall if you really want to S-rank this challenge. But I don't necessarily feel bad about it because, hey, I've already put 40 hours into it. If this were a AAA game, I would have spent $60 or $70 for that and been happy with it. So dropping a few bucks here or there for the gacha mechanic really doesn't feel that bad. So that's sort of came out of left field for me. I wasn't expecting that game to land on my desktop and be something that I sunk a lot of hours into in 2020. But hey, here we are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like that this game kind of ended up landing for you. Because it hit my radar, and even my brother and I were looking into it as possibly a co-op experience, and we kind of steered away from it. And from what I saw, like what you described, like how much you get out of the story for free it seems pretty cool. One of the things that did steer us away from it is sort of like the gacha stuff. Like, it's a tough thing, the monetization. I mean, on one hand, I think it's fair to support developers, but on the other hand, like these, especially like the no duplicate protection, like pure slot machine gachas are really, really concerning. And so it's tough. Like I did hear that in the post game, to really participate in the post game, you really need like certain characters who have certain elements. And if you don't roll like a 5-star version of those, like which you're never guaranteed to get, it can be really challenging. You basically can't participate. So it's cool to hear your perspective, and it's cool that they offer so much game for free. I think it's unfortunate that they structured sort of that particular part of the game and this like the hard gacha, like no duplicate protection, like you could spend $300 and not get what you want kind of pull of the slot machine type experience.
Well, don't let Ryan tell you too much now, because between Orcs Must Die Unchained and Card Hunter, he and I probably put $200 or 200 hours into free-to-play games. But they didn't have that same system. But every once in a while, you'll hit one of these free-to-plays that'll really do it. It'll really scratch an itch for you.
Yeah. Oh, and to be fair, with like Orcs Must Die, I didn't buy the costumes because they were all in loot boxes. And they had duplicate protection. Like I could have gotten the costumes I wanted. It's just it was always like a 1 in 9 chance.
And I never got the ones I wanted.
Well,
ain't it the way?
There is a form of duplicate protection in Genshin. So I mean, like you can roll the same character twice, but each character basically has multiple. Like they're called constellations. So basically each character has like 6 constellations. If you roll the same character twice, then that lets you buy a point in the constellation. So it really is, I mean, I've never gotten 7 of the same character because there's just too many characters. But like I've never been disappointed when I've done a pull and it's like, hey, look, here's Amber. Well, I've already got an Amber. Now I can upgrade this skill, and that makes it way more viable in this form of meta. So I haven't really felt bad about pulling a character that I've already gotten so far.
So who or what is the Genshin, and what is it impacting?
So the Genshin is a meteor, and it's impacting your wallet to take all the money for the 5-star characters.
Okay, fair.
Perfect. No, I'm glad you felt like you, because I mean it is always a tricky thing, but it sounds like you've gotten ample enjoyment for what you've paid, and like that's really all that matters at the end. And like I'm glad you've had that experience.
Yeah, and this is not a World of Warcraft. You cannot sink 100 or 200 hours a week into this. This is one of those, you want to pick it up, you want to play through the story for 25 hours, and then maybe play 45 minutes to an hour each night. Then that's what it's there for the free tier. A lot of the complaints you'll see online are the people that are really wanting to just get way more out of this game than what it's really going to give them at the free tier. So just, pace yourself, go play something else, and you'll have a very good experience with it. So I think I probably said enough about Genshin. So I'm gonna swing way hard the other way. Another game that I've been. Sorry, what'd you say?
We're wrapping around that snake.
Absolutely.
Paul's second game.
So it didn't come out in 2020, but it seems like the entire internet doesn't really care for how much talk it's been getting. I've been playing a lot of Among Us this year. Some of that with friends, some of that with strangers on the internet, and I don't really know how to summarize the game other than to say it is an experience. So it is like ostensibly what you're doing is you and up to 9 other people are going to be, you're on a spaceship that you are trying to fix, and it's hard to really, say other than there's an imposter or two that run around. The imposters try to murder the crewmates, so it's a race. So the imposters are trying to murder the crew before the crew fixes the ship. And then really the only other thing is that whenever you find a body, you can report it. That calls a meeting. You can just call a meeting whenever you want to, and then you and your crewmates are engaged around the table trying to figure out who the imposter is. So it's a whole lot of social manipulation. Like the actual game is not really the actual tasks. Like the actual game is, hey, I found this body, and then I saw Blue kind of run from that direction, but I also haven't seen Brown all game. He could be in the vents or something, and then so then you're trying to convince people, like, hey, no, this guy's the one that killed somebody. Or you could just be like me and be a complete jerk, and you could kill somebody, report the body yourself, and just say, hey, Pink did it. And you just say that. And then people are like, really? And it's like, oh yeah, I saw him. And like, I'm just being a bald-faced liar. Pink was nowhere near it. So Pink's over there getting real angry, and I'm like, hey, listen, the imposter's getting angry. We got to get him off the ship.
You would never do that, though, would you, Paul?
Dude, I do it all the time. It's my way of relieving stress at the end of a long day. But no, it's got some jank to it. There is some issues around the servers, some issues around hacking. Like there are some problems, but I only run into that 1 out of every 10 games, so I don't really think it's the end of the world like you might see on some online forums. It's free on Android. I think it's like $5 on Steam. I think it's on iOS as well. So if you haven't played it, whatever you do, don't get wrapped up. You're probably playing with a lot of like literal children. They probably have no idea what's going on, and just have some fun with it. Pick it up. I would think everyone should play at least a couple of games of it just to get the experience. And I don't know, it's been a lot of fun. So it's just something I think everyone should at least take a look at.
Paul, has in your time playing, has anyone ever completed the tasks?
Yes.
Okay, because I played maybe 2 nights with some folks, and that might have happened once, but it was so unbelievably rare that anyone actually did the task. They were just there, like it was almost like, well, if I see you going and doing the task, I mean, what a sucker. What are you even doing? You're not playing the game. Come on. So It was a rough ride because I don't know, I didn't want to engage with the social part, but that's all there really is. And so I would like try and do a task, and some guy would chop me in half, and then I would just be sitting there like half of a person. And I can't do anything like that. I can't do any of the tasks like as half a person. Can't do it.
Yeah, it's the game is it really is that about that secret identity social stuff of like that is the game, the actual task, like, and moving around the ship, like that's all a loose framework to just have the discussion and lying and who do you believe and all of that stuff. Like that's the real game.
And the tasks and the layout and maps and stuff are a way for the meta to continually develop around the people who are playing a whole lot. They're like, oh, I saw you walk this way right at the beginning, so you're probably the imposter. Like, it's just kind of one of those things that's constantly going to evolve as long as there's enough people playing it to where, like, that sort of social meta is never going to settle.
Yeah, and Nate brings up a good point. They are coming out with some new maps. This development team, who I think is 3 people, they've gotten an incredible amount of attention just in the year 2020. They are working on new stuff. There was going to be an Among Us 2 that got canceled. They're just rolling all those improvements into the original one, and I mean it's been getting a ton of play. So it's fun. It's more like a board game than a video game, I think, really, in a lot of ways. But I think I've probably said enough about that. And Will,
I think Will's pretty sus. I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, Will, you seem kind of sus over there. So I think maybe it's time for me to stop talking and for you to start talking and let us know what else is on your list.
Oh, well, I mean, it reminds me of some other games that I don't like, like Resistance and Avalon. Have you played either of those, Paul?
I played Resistance. I have not played Avalon.
Yeah, but that same sort of like the whole game is the social element.
They're very similar.
Yeah, Werewolf is another one of those. Yeah, I love those games. I just lie to people. It's great. I'm a terrible person. I'm sorry.
So the next game I want to talk about was a game that I told Ryan about back at the beginning of the year. I don't know if he ever got around to checking it out, but it's a game called Magic of Autumn. And it's by a developer called Zurix, who's like actually a one-man squad from Lithuania. And it's kind of a lightweight, little, short-ish deck builder. And I think there were a number of things that I thought were really kind of clever about it. One, I think, is the way that you actually acquire the cards. So there's a mechanic that they call conjuration in the game. And everything that you run into, you can use the conjuration spell on, and you'll have the card for that. So you'll pass maybe a tree or a bonfire or a raft or, a fireball or a statue. Everything that you see in the game, you can conjure into a card. And then with those cards, you kind of have one of each. And I think it's kind of a deck builder in a way, but the puzzles, or I guess the actual sort of matches are really more like puzzles. And I don't know if that's why it appealed to me, because I have a lot of experience with deck builders, but I've never really taken to puzzle games like a game that's if someone tells me first and foremost this is a puzzle game, a lot of times I go running the other direction because I just sort of get fatigued with it after a while. I feel like I don't mind puzzles, but I need a lot in between each one of them so I can sort of like work myself down and work myself back up to the headspace I need to be in. But something about the deck building, how quickly you could get in and get out, and how different each of the challenges was in the game, really, really appealed to me. I think there's something, there's something really nice about also the way in the game you can have a deck of pretty much any size. So I think at maximum you might have like a deck of like 20 cards or something, but in many of the puzzles or the challenges, you'll want your deck to be like 5 or 6 cards. And so I think there's something really satisfying about that idea of sort of coming up with a combination. And so you're coming up with like a unique combination for every single challenge because, every one that kind of they put in front of you is a little bit different. There's also this sort of overarching narrative that's happening in the background. You're sort of some sort of immortal being whose mind has been erased, and you're trying to sort of figure out exactly where your power has gone and who took it and why they took it. And it's got this really sort of somber soundtrack and feel to it. But I guess I just wanted to kind of give that game a little bit more attention, because I think it deserves it. It's a very sort of focused experience, and I think what it sets out to do really, really well. But that's really most of what I had to say about it. I would be super surprised if anyone had actually played this, so we could talk about it. But it's one thing I was going to say about about this podcast was that both of the games I talked about today, you can probably pick them up total for $6 right now on Steam. So I mean, really, what do you got to lose? So anyway, but that was the one I wanted to talk about today, the second one. So I don't know if anyone has any questions about it, but that's what it is.
I do not. Has anybody else got anything while we move away from Mr. Will's second game?
I've not heard about this, but it sounds interesting. I'm watching a video of it right now. So
What is this game called again?
It's called Magic of Autumn. Yeah.
Is it autumn as in the season autumn?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was Googling it and my searches were turning up empty.
Yeah, because it's indie as hell. I mean, it's probably not. That's probably
Atacs is big on supporting indie developers. However, one random guy from Lithuania, that might be a little hard to find sometime.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. Okay. Anyway, yeah. On to the next.
All right, Mr. Ryan. I understand that you got one other thing that you wanted to bring up to us. So why don't you go ahead and lay it on us?
Man, this is tough. Like, I have a short list of games I've been waffling on, and I picked a few extras just in case something got talked about. I think I want to pick something maybe short and simple, and something that I finished playing with my brother recently, which is actually Streets of Rage 4.
Okay.
And it's not the best game on my Game of the Year list, but I just kind of like some of the stuff that it did. It's a very kind of true to its roots, classic beat 'em up. And I never actually played the original Streets of Rage games, but whenever my brother and I kind of booted up Streets of Rage 4 and like dove into it, in some ways it felt like we could have been playing like Turtles in Time on the SNES, because this game is just like it's super polished. It has an awesome soundtrack, by the way. That's one of the highlights of playing the game, is listening to this game's like great soundtrack. But it sticks to its guns with this very simple moveset. You have attack, grab. You might have a dash attack. You might have like you have a special attack button, but like it doesn't really go off the wall with like a bunch of like fighting game moves, or like you don't have tons of progression and collectibles and unlockables. It's just straight up like a classic brawler, and with just tons of polish. And so he and I, over the past, actually we finished a normal run a few weeks ago, and then recently we just finished up our hard run maybe like a couple days ago. We had some free time, and we had a couple of those last few stages to knock out. And I don't know, there are some other interesting games we could talk about, but I just kind of like thought it was cool what this game did, and like how it kind of like came out with a really polished version of sort of like a very classic genre.
Yeah.
I think if there is the Streets of Rage 5, though, I would like to see them do something a little bit more involved, like maybe bring in some newer game design or whatever, like, or more content or something like that.
Yeah, I think if we're wants to bring it back once and be true, I think if you go for another one, a Streets of Rage 5, you gotta maybe do something a little more. Nate and I actually played through this game. I don't know if it's still on Game Pass. It was at the time. Nate and I played through this earlier in the year. I thought it was fun. I had a good time with it. I feel like they nailed the kind of the classic Streets of Rage everything, and the music was pretty jamming.
Yeah, having a good time with a classic 2D beat 'em up in 2020 is no small thing.
Mhm.
It's kind of funny. That's a formula that, I mean, it's like you said, you don't want to do it over and over, but it kind of works every now and then and scratches this itch. And I think they did a really good job with all these little polish and details and like the animations and everything. They really
Right. Well, yeah, and I mean, like having a throwback game, it's not a bad thing. You just can't go back to that well too often, right?
I feel like Streets of Rage 4 is like the perfect Game Pass game as well, because it's like it's a game that, like, if it's on Game Pass, it's short, and if you have a co-op partner, like, it's almost a no-brainer. It's like, yeah, let's just play it.
Right.
Yeah,
Or,
you blow through it.
if you're making the money decision, it's like, it's kind of a standard beat 'em up. Like, I don't know, but if it's on Game Pass and you're doing that, it's like it's the perfect game for that.
Yeah, just sit down and play for a bit. Yeah.
I think there's something going on with this one because, I felt like I had my fill of all the beat 'em ups. I tried, a number of them over the past couple of years. And then as soon as this came out, I heard some folks were kind of excited about it coming out, but I was like, oh, well, what is it? Oh, it's a beat 'em up? Okay, well, then never mind. But then now I've seen it pop up on like multiple Game of the Year lists, and now Ryan's talking about it. So there's something that it's doing. Although you guys are mentioning that the gameplay is kind of standard for the genre, there must be something it's doing. I don't know what it is, but
It's just a good one of those.
okay. Well,
yeah, I think that is worth calling out. Is like I think they really did. It's like if you were to play one of the really solid, like, I don't know, SNES era, the arcade equivalent, like really well polished. You have all these little environmental effects and good enemy design and all that kind of stuff. Even if your own move set is pretty limited.
Yeah, I really want to check out this game. I've never been a huge fan of all of those Streets of Rage games, but I love beat 'em ups back in the day. Ninja Turtles. When you mentioned Turtles in Time, I was like, "Yep, that was
Turtles in Time."
Yeah,
I love
that was my jam.
So,
or those pumping in quarters in arcades for like X-Men or any one of those Konami beat 'em ups. So I think I'll have to check this out with my brother.
So Ryan, I got one question for you. About how long was it from start to finish? How long did it take you to complete, or did you finish it?
Not super long, and I think that is one knock that Flex was mentioning, is that it's like, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 hours to do a run on normal. We did a run on hard, and that took a little longer because we did have to redo a couple of the final stages. But yeah, like, you could probably do 2 playthroughs normal hard, maybe 5-6 hours. So yeah, it's pretty short.
So that's a pretty good length to just sit down with a co-op partner and just spend a couple of hours running through the beat 'em up. So okay, all right. Well, if we don't have anything else for Streets of Rage, Mr. Alyx, you're up to bat.
All right. So for my second game that I really enjoyed this year, I'm gonna turn it down, quite a bit, because Half-Life Alyx, got my adrenaline pumping at a very, very high level. So the other game I really enjoyed was Animal Crossing: New Horizons this year.
There you go.
Sunk over 200 hours into this game. This game came out at a perfect time when I really needed something to kind of take my mind off of the stress of the world. It was a great way to just kind of relax, and it was how I got to meet all of you guys through the great turnip exchange. This game is so charming. It's another Animal Crossing. What can I say? It introduced a couple of new interesting mechanics with the crafting system and the whole island design, that you get at the end. You can basically play God and just recreate your island the way that you see fit, which is kind of insane for an Animal Crossing game. It's not a perfect game by any means. There's the typical Nintendo quirks where you have to jump through all these hoops in order to do something simple, like move a villager's house just one square over. You basically have to move it into a completely different location and then move it back to where you originally wanted to. And you have to fork over the in-game currency, the bells, in order to do so. There's things like that, the typical things like, why can't I just craft things with any of the items that are already hanging around inside my storage? Someone even made a YouTube video of all these amazing enhancements that would be great to add. And what is it? 9 months later, we haven't seen any of those improvements. But, despite all of that, I still really enjoyed the time that I spent with this game. The time that I got to spend seeing the creativity, visiting everyone's islands, just seeing how everyone was so creative with how they laid out the villagers' homes, created gardens, set up waterfalls. And I'm just like, man, I wish I was that creative. I just want to just soak up all this creativity from everyone else. But, despite my island being pretty much kind of a rural environment with just an orchard of fruit trees, I had a great time. I played this game with my entire family. We picked up a second Switch for it. We would visit each other's islands. And even a couple of days ago, we celebrated New Year's that way. We kind of had to time travel a little bit, but there was a very good reason. My kids cannot stay up till midnight to see the ball drop. So we kind of gave them a New Year celebration through the game that way. And it was very charming. They give out glow sticks, you get poppers, you get New Year's hats, and there's a fun little countdown, fireworks in the background. It's just a great way to spend it. I think it's better than spending it with Ryan Seacrest. So this was a very fun game. I will check in every now and then for the holidays, but I think it just kind of delivered what I needed out of it at a time that I really needed it. It was just very relaxing and a great way to take my mind off of things.
Yeah. I think the timing of this game's release, it's forever going to be associated with just everything, the world turning upside down. But yeah, it was, a number of us did. I also put over 100 hours into this game, and quality of life quirks aside that it could use, it was just super charming, super relaxing. A lot of fun playing the stock market, as ridiculous as that was. But yeah, they just a lot of fun little touches you can get into in this game, and I definitely had a lot of fun with the time I put into it. I have not revisited it since like May or June, whenever I stopped playing. So I should have checked in over holidays and stuff. But yeah, it's always the weird thing with Animal Crossing is I kind of I have my time. It's a game you're meant to play like year over year, like check in with periodically. I kind of had my time with it and moved on, but
now your fruit's all rotted.
Yeah, your fruit's all rotted. There's no more flowers
everywhere. Hopefully,
cockroaches all in your house, man.
You come back and all your villagers are like, "Where have you been?"
Yeah.
What was it? Pietro is
I never
the
got
only
it.
one left.
If only. I got Becky instead.
Yeah, I wanted to put more time into it than what I did, but the whole one island per Switch thing really kind of killed it for our household, because my wife got to it first and she really enjoyed playing it. She put in probably over 100 hours, and I'm like, all right, well I want to get into this, and it's like, okay, here's your corner, and I'm like, I don't want a corner, I want an island. And it's like, no, you can't have that. You can have this corner, and it's like, okay. Maybe I'll look into this later, because I'm not going to buy another Switch for it. But no, she really enjoyed playing it, and you're right. That timing is going to be forever remembered. That everyone had to go home for COVID, and then everyone immediately started playing the turnip market. So, but all right, Mr. Alyx, thank you for your insights on Animal Crossing. Flex, you're up next. So what? I mean, we've gone through a lot. I know you haven't played that many games in 2020, so you got anything left?
I mean, yeah. There's a whole lot of games I want to talk about,
Is this
but
the trick question?
I got to pick only one. I think, I think what I'm going to go with, because like there's a bunch of games I can talk about, and I'm going to stick with this theme of games that surprised me the most. So Monster Train was one of them. It's a game I would have never expected I would have liked as much as I did before I played it. So the second game is similar, and that is Paradise Killer. I knew very little, or I knew nothing about this game before it came out, and is definitely one of the best surprises for me of the year. The pitch is it is an open world detective game. So there is basically a murder mystery on this island, and you're brought in to figure out what's going on. And, you know, once the initial premise is set up, you're kind of on your own to just go walk around the island and question people and find evidence and like piece together this, you know, big, intricate, complex, you know, murder mystery. Like you're doing the legwork and piecing it together. And it has a lot of really interesting, like that I mean, that is itself is that's a gameplay concept I've never encountered before. And, you know, if it's been done before, like as an open world detective game, like I've played a couple of detective type games before. Like Return of the Obra Dinn is one that comes to mind, but, you know, that's a little more linear. Like, you know, maybe the mental mapping is more flexible, but I've never played something quite like Paradise Killer that is, you know, you really kind of just piece things together in whatever order. But so like the concept itself is interesting, and then in the execution, like this is a game that just really goes for it. It has a really bizarre like mythos behind it, has a really goofy art style that's very striking and memorable, has a super funky soundtrack that I got really into. And then just the characters and the writing, like the island's doctor, his name is Dr. Doom Jazz. There's a character whose name is Witness to the End. Your character is Lady Love Dies. Like this is like the kind of tone this game's going for. It's, and I appreciate that it goes for it, and it has just tons of personality into it, in it. And I really enjoyed just kind of exploring the island and getting into it, digging into it. And then the way the mystery itself unfolds, I think, is really neat. And I imagine it could unfold very differently for different players, like based on just kind of like the order of things you know, how you discover things, how you start piecing it together in your head, you know, who you talk to in what order. And, you know, the characters will say, you know, they have things to say about the other characters, and, you know, will kind of lead you in different directions based on, you know, who you're talking to and all that stuff. And then the game, this is maybe slightly spoilery, but they kind of allude to it at the beginning of the game. But one thing I think that's really interesting about the game is you can go trigger, you know, you're collecting evidence, piecing together the mystery, and they tell you up front, it's like, hey, when you've made your case, like when you build up your evidence and you have your case, come back here and we'll start the trial. So you can literally just go do the final trial anytime. So it's kind of a strange concept in some ways of like, yeah, you go when you think you have it pieced together, you go back, and, you know, you might have missed some evidence, or, you know, you might have a certain set of evidence that like takes your perspective in one direction. And like, that's the case you're going to present. Which I think is kind of interesting. Like it's like they kind of de-gamify it in some ways, which is interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting. And like I said, the whole presentation and like just the way it's executed, I thought was really, I mean, the movement and like physically navigating around the island is maybe a little bit of indie jank in there. Like it's not super polished in that way.
Yeah.
But the actual gameplay concepts, I think, are really, really fascinating. And then just all the style and the characters and the writing, and like, it's super bizarre, but it worked for me in a really fun, goofy way that I got really into. They're literally building islands where they're sacrificing people to the gods to like try and create paradise. It's super bizarre, but it's fun. And I, when I went and presented my case at the end, it was pretty satisfying to just walk through all those steps and like be like, all right, I think I understood what happened here. And, I was pretty completionist. I feel like, maybe there's something I missed, but I feel like I had put together, I pretty much understood what had happened. And I think the story it tells is interesting too. Like the motivations for the characters and, what they're all trying to accomplish. And, a lot of them are trying to lie and cover things up and, working through all that stuff. Like, I feel like it was I enjoyed piecing that together and kind of navigating that story and that mystery. It was an enjoyable experience for sure.
I have a question.
Yeah, I was looking at some of the screenshots for this while you were talking, and this game has a style to it. You're certainly right about that.
Yep. It knows what it wants to be and it goes for it.
Yeah. Interesting. So.
Flex, do you think that it's a kind of like once you're done, it's a one and done type of situation where you kind of gotten what you need out of it, or do you feel like you could go back to it and kind of explore different dialogue paths, and there's like more that you could kind of wring out of it if you already kind of solve the main mystery?
Yeah, I think like nothing's really going to change. I think the only interesting, I think you're not really going to get a whole lot playing a second time through. I think the only interesting thing you could get is triggering the trial with more or less evidence, because you can't actually build your case unless you have actually discovered the evidence. Like one good thing the game does is it actually tracks all your evidence and like all the story points and kind of this log. So like when you're in the trial, you have to go through there and actually, present the evidence. So if you don't have the evidence, even if you, the player, know what happened, if you haven't actually found the evidence, you can't move in that direction. So all this to say, like, I think it would be really interesting to see what happens if like you go and trigger the final trial with basically no evidence. So like I've done it with basically all the evidence, but like I am kind of curious what it actually looks like if you just go in and you're like, I didn't actually find anything, but we're going to accuse this person anyway and see what happens.
So you've stumbled onto how to play Among Us. You just point at someone and go, they did it. And maybe you're right, maybe you're not.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to your games done quick any % run on Paradise Killer.
Yes.
Yep. Catch me next year at the summer at Summer Games Done Quick.
There we go.
It was definitely a big surprise for me this year. It was a game that came out and I hadn't really heard of, and it looked interesting. I played it and ended up really liking it.
Nice.
I just started this game this week, so I don't have the full perspective on where the mystery goes, but just jumping into the game and seeing the style of it, and they start throwing all the names of the gods and explaining what this paradise is, and it's just like, I don't know. I think there's something very earnest about it that comes across way better than something I typically hate in games or movies that are just super lore heavy, where they just dump a bunch of stuff on you at the beginning and expect you to care. This Paradise Killer somehow manages to thread that in a way where it's like you get a small nugget of everything, but every little nugget is inherently interesting. It's not just a bunch of history's sake. Like everything is so wild and so different and so earnest that it makes it interesting.
Yeah, and they track all of that history and lore in your your Starlight computer, they call it. Basically your log, so you can go and check it anytime as well.
Logbook. There you go. All right. Well, Mr. Nate, I think that you started this. You're gonna be the last person to bring us a game. Make it a good one.
Okay.
No pressure.
No pressure.
Yep. I also am slightly hoarse, so I will make it through this as best I can. I think the game I have to end on, because it wouldn't be honest to me if I didn't, is the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
All right.
A good choice.
I almost called that out as well. So how about that ending, huh?
Yeah, let's
Oh,
just
man.
let's just talk through the ending again for a
Go
long
straight for
time.
it. Straight for the throat.
You can go see our deep dive discussion where we spend like 40 minutes on the ending alone. But
Yes, we've talked at length about that, so I won't spoil the ending to the first part of Final Fantasy VII Remake, but a very, very, very high production, very well made, very bombastic and ridiculous and over the top remake of the first 5 hours of Final Fantasy VII. Stretched out to be a 40-hour RPG.
yep.
Yeah.
Game is nothing if not extravagant.
Whenever I brought up Trials of Mana, it was a little tough in a way because, I think, obviously that was a bit more of a personal pick and we've spoiler casted the FF7 remake, but in terms of being an action RPG, I think Square was really trying to step it up and they probably learned a lot with, 15, which was, I thought it was fun, but it was very mashy, very kind of I don't know. Yeah, you just kind of wail on enemies that don't really react that much. Whereas Final Fantasy VII Remake felt more like they were trying to go for sort of like the God of War style combat where it's a beat 'em up where you're knocking enemies around and they did a good job with balancing equipment and balancing the materia system and they just did a lot of great things with the gameplay. In addition to, you've alluded, you've got kind of the Final Fantasy VII story, and they're really deep diving into those characters and that world and the city of Midgar, and I think they nailed a lot of what made that stuff interesting. And went off the deep end here and there, but it was still a ride. It was still fun.
It's always entertaining no matter where they go in this game.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, that combat is so good. I thought this at the time, and I still think that it might be my favorite RPG combat system that I've ever played. It's so well put together and well thought out, both as an action game and as an RPG system. It's just incredibly satisfying, especially some of the big boss fights where you're trying to work them around using all of your abilities from all your characters, working up the stagger meter, and then going in for those big killing blows. Never gets old. And then beyond that, it's just a really well told story of the events of Midgar expanded out, and we get to see that story that we hadn't seen before in glorious Ultra HD.
Yeah, they did obviously they, had their own. You don't go from a 5-hour section of the game to its own 40-hour games without adding stuff. But I think a number of us would say the original Final Fantasy VII is a game we love, is a classic already, and I think the way they've portrayed the parts of that original game that they do here, they've done really well, and blown that up for HD and everything. And I mean, that's the story of that game holds up. In some ways, it's more relevant today than it was in the 90s. And they did a good job with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I watched Steph play through a decent portion of that. It's still on my backlog for when the PS5 arrives. I'm curious to see how that plays there. And it's just, I know that we can kind of tongue-in-cheek say, okay, that was a 40-hour game for the first 5 hours of the original. But, just from the stuff that I was watching her play, I don't really, there's some side quest stuff there, but I really enjoyed sort of being immersed in that one part of the world. And the fact that they took and they spent so much effort on that one part, that makes me kind of excited to see what they do with the rest of it as it continues to be released in episodic format. I don't know how much of the next episode, how much that's going to cover the original story, or how much they're going to diverge for it. And there's a bunch of questions, but they did a good job, and I do look forward to sitting down and kind of getting into that one after my PS5 makes it to my doorstep.
And the last thing I'll say is I really appreciate that they went for something like this. It feels like a game they had fun making. Like I feel like Final Fantasy games over the past decade or two have sometimes gotten a little too self-serious in a way, and this Final Fantasy VII Remake, you know, obviously they're remaking a game from the 90s, but it also felt like they kind of, like, those early Final Fantasy games were very goofy.
Yep.
And I feel like they have re-embraced the goofiness in a way that was fun. So I really appreciated that it wasn't all just melodrama. Like they have fun with it too.
Fighting that house was hilarious to watch. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, it's a good fight.
It's a good fight.
Hey everyone, Flex here. Our recording cut out at this part of the podcast, so unfortunately we got cut off right at the end of our Final Fantasy VII discussion, and we did not get to record an outro with the whole crew. The good news is we were pretty much wrapping up anyway, so I'm just piping in here to provide a little bit of an outro and say thanks for listening to our Game of the Year 2020 episode. We got to talk about a good handful of games that we enjoyed throughout the year and talk about what we liked about them. We hope you enjoyed listening, and sorry again for the abrupt conclusion here, but that's going to be an episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time on Atacs.